The words arrived so quietly, they barely made a sound. Someone is trying to hurt you. 4 words. Whispered. Calm. And impossible to unhear. Marcus Ellington had built one of the most successful technology companies in America. It had survived hostile takeovers, market collapses, and the kind of prolonged pressure that ages a man a decade in a single quarter. It had heard threats from competitors, lawyers, and shareholders who wanted his seat at the table. It had sat across from people who smiled at him while planning to bury him. It thought he had learned to recognize danger when it was near. None of that prepared him for this. None of the threats he had ever received landed the way those 4 words did, spoken by a child barely reaching his elbow, at his own engagement party. The ballroom of the Ellington Grand Hotel was exactly what his team had promised. Crystal chandeliers poured warm gold light across polished marble floors. Wheated roses climbed tall silver centerpieces on every table. A string quartet played near the stage, soft and elegant. Hundreds of guests dressed in tailored suits and designer gowns filled the room beneath the glow, laughing, raising glasses, celebrating the future Marcus had quietly worked toward for 2 years. Everything was perfect. Every detail had been arranged with precision. Every face in that room was familiar to him in some way. And somewhere in the middle of all that luxury, a little girl in a simple blue dress was staring at the champagne flute in his hand like it was a loaded weapon. Her name was Nia Brooks. 8 years old. Deep brown eyes. Neat braids tied with silver ribbons, and on her wrist, a small silver bracelet that caught the chandelier light whenever she moved. Her grandmother ran a program at the community center his foundation funded downtown. Nia was not supposed to be important tonight. She had no reason to be at the center of this evening. No reason to be the most important person in the room. And yet. She looked at the glass. Then at him. She did not smile. She did not look away. She stood her ground the way someone stands when they know something that everyone else has missed. Someone is trying to hurt you, she said again. Softer this time. Like a secret she had been carrying too long and could no longer hold alone. Marcus crouched down slowly, lowering himself until their eyes were level. Around them, guests continued laughing. The music kept playing. No one turned. No one noticed. The celebration moved on, unaware, the way celebrations do. He studied her face carefully. He had been in enough rooms with enough people to understand what desperation looked like, and what fear looked like, and what a child trying to get attention looked like. This was none of those things. Her eyes were steady. Her voice had not trembled. She looked like someone who had weighed the cost of staying silent, and decided it was too high. What did you see, Nia? He asked gently. She swallowed. Her small fingers closed tighter around the bracelet. I saw someone switch your glass. The words settled into him like cold water moving through bone. Before she could say another word, applause erupted near the stage. The quartet had finished a piece, and the noise rippled outward through the ballroom like a wave breaking across a shoreline. Nia flinched at the sudden sound. Marcus noticed. He fouled it away. Children who were acting out did not flinch at applause. Children who were genuinely frightened did. Then Victoria appeared. Victoria Hayes moved across the ballroom the way she moved through every room. With the kind of ease that came from knowing exactly how beautiful you were, and choosing to wear it lightly. Her white designer gown caught the chandelier light with every step. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly. Her smile, as always, was warm enough to disarm a room full of strangers. She slipped her arm through Marcus's and leaned close. There you are. Everyone is waiting for the toast. I know, Marcus said. His eyes drifted briefly back toward Nia. Used for a second. Victoria followed his gaze toward the little girl. She's adorable, she said warmly. One of the scholarship families? Her grandmother helps run the community center, Marcus replied. Victoria smiled. That explains the manners. She turned back toward him. Are you ready? Marcus looked at the champagne glass in his hand. The bubbles moved slowly toward the surface, quiet and indifferent. He stared at them for just a moment longer than he normally would have. Then he set the glass on a passing server's tray. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Brave. Almost invisible. Gone before he could name it. I need water, he said simply. Long night. Victoria laughed softly. You have been working too hard. She squeezed his arm and moved ahead toward the stage, greeting guests along the way, her attention already redirected. Marcus stood still for a moment. He exhaled slowly. Then he looked back at Nia, who had not moved, who was still watching him with those steady brown eyes, as if she was waiting to find out what kind of man he was. Tell me the rest, he said quietly. She leaned in close. Before you came into the ballroom, I was getting lemonade near the service table. She glanced toward the drink station. I heard two voices coming from the hallway behind the wall. A man and a woman. The woman sounded calm, like she was in charge of something and had already decided it was going to happen. The man sounded nervous, like he didn't want to be there at all. And the woman said. Nia paused, gathering the memory carefully, the way someone gathers something fragile. She said it had to happen before the wedding. She said no one would notice. Because everyone trusted her. Marcus stared at her. The noise of the ballroom seemed farther away now, as though someone had slowly turned down the volume on the world. And the glass? He asked. The one on the tray right now is not the one that was there before. Someone came and moved it while you were talking to her. I watched it happen. He watched them set a different glass in the same spot. Marcus straightened slowly. He looked at the tray. He looked at the glass that had just been returned to its position by the server. He looked at the small empty space where a different glass had once sat. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. He walked calmly toward his executive assistant, Daniel Ross, who stood near the ballroom entrance reviewing the evening's schedule on a tablet. He need you to find out who prepared the drinks for tonight, Marcus said quietly. Every person with access to the staging room. Every entry on the access log. Do it now, and do it without drawing attention. Daniel blinked. But he had worked beside Marcus for 15 years. He knew when something was serious. Of course, he said. Marcus walked away. He did not pick up another glass for the rest of the evening. Daniel found him 12 minutes later in a side corridor just beyond the ballroom, away from the music, away from the laughter, in the quiet hum of ventilation systems and the distant clink of dishes from the hotel kitchen. He was holding a tablet. His face was already tense. Every drink served tonight was prepared in a secured staging area, he began. According to the catering manager, only 6 people had authorized access. The head bartender. 2 servers. The catering supervisor. A post. Myself. And Victoria. Marcus said nothing. He waited. My name is on the log because I approved the final seating chart in the same room earlier in the day, Daniel explained. But there's something else. He swiped to another screen. 1 glass went missing from the staging area. 30 minutes before the party started. The bartender assumed the server grabbed it early for setup. The server assumed the bartender had moved it. No one questioned it. No one followed up. Marcus thought of Nia pointing at the serving tray. The empty space. The glass that was not the same glass. Security footage, he asked. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. The camera covering the staging room went offline for 11 minutes. The words landed like a door closing at the end of a long hallway. Accident? Marcus asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. He considered it for a moment before saying, maybe. Neither of them believed it. They found Nia standing by a wide window at the far end of the corridor, staring out at the Atlanta skyline. The city spread out beneath her in layers of amber and white light, enormous and indifferent. She turned when she heard them approach, and something in her expression told Marcus she had been waiting and had more to say. I remembered. Something else, she said. Tell me. The nervous man. He kept saying it was a bad idea. He said someone might find out. She twisted the bracelet slowly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded scared. Like he already knew it was going to go wrong and he couldn't stop it. Marcus and Daniel exchanged a look. That detail mattered more than it might have seemed. This was not the picture of two people equally committed to a plan. One person was driving. One person was being pulled along. One calm. One afraid. That distinction could matter later. Then Nia straightened slightly and pointed across the ballroom through the corridor window. Here, she said quietly. A woman in catering uniform moved through the crowd near the far side of the room, carrying an empty silver tray, weaving between guests without making eye contact. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of person no one looks at twice at an event like this. I saw her, Nia said. She was standing outside the staging room when I heard the voices. Marcus was already moving before she finished the sentence. They lost her in the corridor. The woman had pushed through a service door and disappeared into the stairwell before they were close enough to stop her. One floor down. Then another. Until the footsteps faded, and they stood on the lower banquet level surrounded by staff who were preparing for other events, none of whom matched the woman Nia had identified. Daniel found a staffing clipboard resting on a supply cart near the wall. He scanned through every name assigned to that section of the ballroom for tonight's event. None of them matched her description. She's not listed, he said quietly. Then she shouldn't be here, Marcus replied. The room felt colder than the air conditioning could explain. If the woman had entered under false credentials, then nothing about her presence tonight had been casual or accidental. She had a purpose. She had known exactly where to be and when. Daniel continued through the file, scanning each name, each check-in time, each shift assignment. Then he stopped at a name that had been registered at the beginning of the shift but had never logged a single activity since. No breaks. No supply runs. No station check-ins. A ghost on the schedule. The name was Angela Pierce. Nia looked at Daniel's phone the moment the photograph appeared on the screen. That's her, she said without hesitation. Daniel immediately requested her full employee file from hotel security. Angela Pierce had worked 3 events at the hotel in the past 6 weeks. Nothing before that, no history, no prior shifts, no references beyond the current engagement. And at the bottom of her application, in the emergency contact field, a name appeared that Marcus recognized immediately. Victoria Ayes. Same home address. Marcus stared at the screen without speaking. Daniel said nothing. From somewhere above them, the muffled sounds of the celebration drifted down through the ceiling. Laughter. Applause. The sound of a room that did not know what was happening beneath it. How long has Victoria had family working here? Marcus asked. She never mentioned it, Daniel said. Silence. Daniel scrolled further through the file. Then he found the referral section, the sponsorship field, meaning someone in a position of authority had personally vouched for Angela Pierce's employment. The name listed there was Victoria Hayes. Marcus was quiet for a long time after that. He was a businessman, and that required something he had always believed in absolutely, the discipline to separate what he suspected from what he could prove. He had spent 20 years learning not to confuse coincidence with evidence, not to let suspicion collapse into accusation before the facts were assembled. He was not willing to destroy something real, something that had taken 2 years to build, based on a feeling and a name on an employment form. But the pattern was becoming harder to deny. He looked at Nia. She was watching both of them carefully, reading the silence the way children sometimes read what adults refuse to say out loud. She did not ask what it meant. She already knew it was serious. Find Angela, Marcus said. Quietly. Don't alarm anyone upstairs. Before Daniel could make a single call, his phone lit up with a message from hotel security. Angela Pierce had left the building 40 minutes. Ago exit log confirmed it. She had clocked out and not returned. Then security sent something else. An image from the parking garage camera. Enhanced, but still grainy. Angela appears standing beside a black sedan at the far end of the lower level. And next to her, partially shadowed beneath the concrete ceiling, partially turned away from the lens, was a man in a dark blue tie. Nia noticed the tie before either of the two adults said a word. "That's the same tie," she said. "From the other picture." Marcus looked at her. "What other picture?" Daniel pulled it up immediately. The earlier security image that had briefly and confusingly appeared to show Daniel himself in the hallway near the staging room. The man in that image had been wearing a dark blue tie. Not Daniel, who was wearing silver that evening. Not a coincidence. The same person in both images. The same tie. Security ran the badge enhancement a few minutes later. Marcus read the name that came back. He read it a second time to be certain. Dr. Ethan Mercer. He's physician. 3 years of routine checkups, blood work, and structured wellness plans. The man who had recommended the daily supplement routine Marcus had never once skipped. The man whose advice Marcus had treated like gospel, because there had been no reason to do anything else. Until now. He stood still in the quiet corridor, and for the first time that evening, he began to understand that what had happened tonight had not begun tonight. It had been building for months, quietly, in the background of his life, in the spaces he never thought to look. The hotel security supervisor found them in the service corridor 20 minutes later, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that had moved well past professional concern into something closer to genuine unease. "The camera that went offline," he said. "It wasn't completely dark. Whoever disabled the live feed didn't realize the internal backup continued recording independently. We recovered most of the footage from the 11-minute window." The room went very quiet. Marcus took the tablet. He pressed play. The staging room filled the screen. The timestamp confirmed it, 32 minutes before the party was scheduled to begin. The door opened. Victoria Hayes stepped inside. She moved with the same ease Marcus had watched her carry through every room for 2 years. Unurried. Composed. Completely at home wherever she stood. She crossed toward the preparation counter where the champagne glasses had been arranged in neat, matching rows. She stopped. She looked toward the door. Then she waited. A second figure entered moments later. Angela Pierce. The two women stood together for less than a minute, but the familiarity between them was unmistakable. This was not a first meeting. They knew each other well. Angela produced a small envelope and handed it across. Victoria took it, opened it briefly, looked at what was inside, and placed it carefully inside her purse. Then Angela turned and pointed toward the champagne setup along the far wall. And Victoria shook her head. Angela pointed again. More insistently this time. Victoria crossed her arms. She shook her head a second time, and her posture shifted into something firmer. She was not agreeing. She was not cooperating. She looked like someone being pressed across a line she had already decided not to cross. Then she turned and walked toward the door without another word. Before she left, she removed the key card from her purse and placed it on the counter. Angela picked it up the moment Victoria cleared the doorway. Marcus backed the footage up and watched that exchange again. He watched it a third time. "She gave her access," he said slowly. "But not permission." Daniel folded his arms. She knew Angela. But she didn't go along with whatever Angela was planning in that room. Then why was she here at all? No one had an answer to that yet. The recording continued. Angela alone now. She moved to the edge of the frame, into the section where the camera's coverage ended, and disappeared from view for 30 seconds. When she reappeared, she was holding a single champagne glass. She looked toward the hallway entrance. Then she left the room quickly, the glass held carefully in both hands. The missing glass. The one Nia had recognized from 20 feet away across a crowded ballroom. Marcus handed the tablet back to the supervisor. His voice was steady when he spoke. What happened to that glass? We don't know yet, the supervisor said. Then his radio crackled. He listened for a brief moment, his expression shifting into something careful and deliberate. He looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Ellington. A brief pause. Angela Pierce is back in the building. She came back on her own. No one brought her in. And she's asking to speak with you. The conference room on the second floor was small and quiet, separated from the noise of the evening. Glass walls looked out over the Atlanta skyline, the city spreading wide and indifferent beneath a clear night sky. Everything that had happened in the past 2 hours felt very far away from that room, and also very close. Angela Pierce sat alone at the far end of the table. She stood the moment Marcus pushed open the door. She did not look like someone who had been caught. She did not look defiant, or calculating, or prepared with a story. She looked the way people look when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long, and have finally made the decision to set it down regardless of what it costs. Thank you for coming, she said. Marcus did not sit. He stood across the table from her. Danielle stayed near the door. Nia took a chair near the window, quiet and still, her bracelet resting against the table edge. Start talking, Marcus said. Angela reached into her purse and placed an envelope on the table. Marcus recognized it immediately from the footage, the same envelope Victoria had opened and placed in her purse in the staging room. Angela had taken it back after Victoria left. Marcus opened it. Inside was a legal document. His name at the top. Victoria's name beside it. A prenuptial agreement, labeled as the final version. But as Marcus read through the first several pages, the language was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a clerical error. Wrong in the way of intent. Large sections of his estate had been restructured under transfer conditions he had never discussed with anyone. Clauses appeared that his legal team had never reviewed, never been presented with, and never signed off on. Daniel leaned over his shoulder and read for a moment. Then he straightened. These changes were never submitted to legal counsel, he said quietly. No, Angela confirmed. Because they weren't meant to be reviewed. They were meant to be signed before the wedding, in a moment when Marcus was distracted, or trusting, or simply not reading carefully enough. Marcus looked up. How do you know all of this? Angela took a slow breath. Because Victoria asked me to deliver the original documents to Dr. Mercer 6 weeks ago. I'm her cousin. We have known each other our whole lives. She trusted me to carry things without asking too many questions. She paused. I didn't understand what I was carrying then. But I started putting pieces together. And when I realized what it meant, I made a copy before I delivered the envelope. I kept it. The room was very still. Dr. Mercer, Marcus said, mostly to himself. He wasn't trying to harm you physically, Angela said quickly. The supplements he prescribed were not dangerous in isolation. But combined with specific additional compounds introduced gradually over time, they could produce a pattern of symptoms that closely resembled serious cognitive decline. Fatigue. Difficulty concentrating. Memory inconsistencies. The kind of symptoms that, when documented by a physician over several months, could support a legal argument that a person was no longer fit to manage their own affairs. Marcus felt something cold settle into the center of his chest. He thought about the past 8 months. The tiredness that had crept in despite full nights of sleep. The occasional feeling that his thoughts were moving through something thick. The moments where his focus had slipped in meetings and he had told himself it was stress. He had told himself it was stress. The plan, Angela continued, was to build a documented medical record of declining cognitive function. Enough to file a legal petition arguing that Marcus Ellington was no longer capable of overseeing Ellington dynamics. And under those circumstances, with the modified prenuptial agreement already in place and signed, the estate provisions would activate. Automatically. The company. The assets. The foundation holdings. All of it. Daniel put down the document and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, they were going to have him declared unfit. Angela nodded. Her voice was lower now. I found out the full scope of it by accident, 3 weeks before tonight. I should have come forward then. She looked at the table. I was afraid. I didn't know who else was involved. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. Victoria is charming, and she is trusted, and I am her cousin. I thought if I said something, I would be the one who looked unstable. What changed tonight? Marcus asked. Angela looked toward the window. Then her gaze moved to Nia. I heard her, she said simply. I was standing in the corridor outside this floor when a little girl walked up to one of the most powerful men in this city, at his own engagement party, surrounded by hundreds of people, and told him the truth. Without pausing to calculate whether it was safe. Without asking what she would get in return. Without knowing whether he would believe her or dismiss her or simply walk away. Her voice was quieter now. I have been sitting on the truth for 3 weeks, afraid of what it would cost me. She was 8 years old and she didn't hesitate for a second. That gave me more courage than anything I could have told myself. Nia looked down at the silver bracelet on her wrist. Nobody spoke for a moment. Marcus closed the document slowly. He looked at Angela across the table for a long time. Then he looked at Daniel. Then he looked at the small girl sitting near the window, watching the city lights below with the same calm steadiness she had carried since the moment she first spoke to him in that ballroom. Nia, he said softly. She looked at him. You knew none of this when you warned me. She shook her head. I just knew what I heard. That was enough, he said. Marcus walked back into the ballroom. The chandeliers were still glowing. The roses were still white. The quartet was still playing. But everything inside the room felt different to him now. Like a room that looks exactly the same as it did before, but you know too much about it to see it the same way again. Conversation softened as guests noticed his entrance. A ripple of awareness moved through the crowd, the way it always does when the person everyone has been waiting for finally reappears. Victoria stood near the center of the room. Her smile adjusted slightly as she saw his expression. Marcus stepped to the stage. He took the microphone. The music softened. The room went quiet. He looked out across the crowd. Hundreds of faces turned toward him. He did not rush. He did not perform. He simply stood there for a long moment, thinking about what he had been an hour away from drinking, from signing, from becoming. Thinking about the plan that had nearly worked, and about the single person who had interrupted it. Then he spoke. Tonight, he said, I was reminded that truth doesn't arrive on a schedule. It doesn't wait for the right moment, or the right setting, or the right person to deliver it. It paused. Sometimes truth arrives from someone you would never expect. Someone quiet. Someone easy to overlook. Someone who simply decided that staying silent was not an option. His eyes found Nia near the back of the room. Standing beside Daniel, the silver bracelet on her wrist, those steady brown eyes watching him without any particular need to be seen. I owe a debt tonight that I am not sure I know how to repay, Marcus continued. And I want to be very clear about that. He looked at Victoria. Her smile was gone. In its place was the careful stillness of someone waiting to understand exactly how much had been discovered and how much remained. This engagement is over, Marcus said. His voice was not raised. It was not cruel. It was simply the voice of a man who had made a decision and was saying it out loud. Several serious matters have come to light tonight that will require full investigation. I will not address them further in this room. But I will say one more thing. He looked across the crowd. The most important person here tonight was not the man at the microphone. He stepped back. He set the microphone down. Smoke moved through the ballroom in slow waves. Whispers rose and spread. Cameras that had been raised for celebratory photographs were quietly lowered. A staff paused mid-motion. One by one, heads turned to follow Marcus's gaze toward the back corner of the room, where a child in a simple blue dress stood holding a silver bracelet, looking as though she would very much prefer to be anywhere except the center of this much attention. Much later, when most of the guests had gone and the hotel staff had begun the quiet work of dismantling the evening, Marcus found Nia standing at the wide lobby window that overlooked downtown Atlanta. The city was still bright. Still moving. Carrying on the way cities do, without needing to know what had happened inside one building on one particular night. Cars moved through the streets below, their headlights crossing the pavement in calm, unhurried arcs. "You should be tired," Marcus said, walking up beside her. "I am," she said. But she did not move away from the window. He stood beside her for a moment, both of them looking at the lights, the two of them sharing the kind of quiet that only settles after something significant has ended. "You saved my life tonight," he said. Maybe not the way that phrase sounds in the movies. But in the way that counts when you're the one living it. Nia considered that for a moment. "I just said what I heard." "Most people who hear something like that find a reason to stay quiet," Marcus replied. "They weigh the cost. They think about whether anyone will believe them. They decide it's not their problem." He looked down at her. "You didn't do any of that." She shrugged one shoulder. "My grandma says if you know the truth and you don't say it, the truth doesn't go away. It just stays inside you and gets heavy. She says that's how people lose themselves. A little bit at a time." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother is right," he said. Nia looked up at him. "Are you going to be okay?" The question was so simple. No strategy behind it. No calculation. Used to child asking a man she barely knew whether he was going to be okay. "I think so," he said. "It's going to be complicated for a while. There will be lawyers, and investigations, and conversations I'm not looking forward to." He exhaled slowly. "But I'll be okay." She nodded, apparently satisfied with that answer. They stood together a little longer, neither one in a hurry to move. The city turned below them. One man who had built an empire from strategy and control, and one little girl who had walked into a room full of powerful people carrying nothing but the truth. "I want to make sure your grandmother knows what you did tonight," Marcus said finally. Nia looked slightly alarmed. "She's going to make me eat more vegetables. She always says doing the right thing means your body needs more fuel." Marcus laughed. A real laugh. Unguarded and genuine. The first one all evening. He crouched down so their eyes were level again, just as they had been in the ballroom when this whole night began. "Whatever you need," he said. "School. Whatever comes after school. Whatever you decide you want to do with your life. You come find me." "All right." Nia studied him for a moment, deciding whether the offer was real. "Okay," she said. And that was all. The city lights continued below. The hotel settled into its late-night quiet. And Marcus stood there slowly, thinking about the plan that had nearly worked. Built over months. Involving a doctor he had trusted with his health, a woman he had trusted with his future, and a legal document carefully designed to erase everything he had spent his life building. And all of it, every piece of it, had come apart because of an 8-year-old girl who had simply decided to say something. Power did not protect him tonight. Beal did not protect him. His instincts, his security team, his attorneys, his 2 decades of reading people across boardroom tables, none of it caught what she caught. A child with a silver bracelet protected him. Because she listened when no one else was paying attention. Because she was willing to speak when speaking felt impossible. Because she understood something that people with power and resources and carefully constructed lives sometimes forget, that the truth is only useful if someone is brave enough to carry it forward. And she carried it all the way across a ballroom full of crystal chandeliers and powerful strangers who never once looked her way. Until it was too late for them to look anywhere else. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being powerful. Not the loneliness of being alone in a room. The loneliness of being in a room full of people who want something from you. People who smile at you because of what you represent. People who listen when you speak, not because your words interest them, but because your words have the ability to affect their lives. Marcus had lived in that kind of room for 20 years. He had learned how to read it. He had learned how to hold his position at the center of it without being consumed by it. He had built walls that were invisible, careful, and effective. And the child had seen past every single one of them in under 30 seconds. Not because she was exceptional in the way that earned attention. Not because she was loud, or insistent, or clever with her words. But because she had no walls of her own to worry about. She had no position to protect. She had nothing to lose and no reason to stay quiet except the comfort of silence, and she had decided that comfort was not worth more than the truth. That was the thing Marcus kept coming back to, standing at the lobby window long after Nia had been collected by her grandmother, long after the last guests had filtered out through the hotel doors. He kept thinking about what it had cost her to walk across that ballroom. An 8-year-old girl walking through a crowd of strangers in formal wear, toward a man she barely knew, to say something that could easily have been dismissed or laughed away. She had done it anyway. Not because she had calculated that it was safe. Not because someone told her to. Because it was the right thing, and that was apparently enough. Marcus thought about how rare that was. In rooms like the one upstairs, right things got weighed constantly. They got measured against risk, against relationship, against reputation. The right thing often finished last in that calculation. He had spent 2 years with Victoria Hayes and never truly questioned what he was seeing. He had trusted Dr. Mercer for 3 years and never looked at a single prescription twice. He had built every safeguard in the world around his company and his assets, and not one of them had been positioned toward the people closest to him. That was what the plan had relied on. Not just his trust. His certainty that the people he loved were above suspicion. That conviction, held quietly and without examination, was the vulnerability. And it had nearly cost him everything. Daniel had sent him a message an hour after the ballroom cleared. Security had confirmed that the champagne glass recovered from Angela Pierce had been tested. The results were preliminary, but the findings were consistent with what Angela had described. Something had been added. Not enough to cause immediate harm. Enough, over time, to create a pattern. Enough to build a case. Lawyers had been contacted. Investigators were already being briefed. The process was beginning, slow and methodical and unpleasant, the way the truth always becomes unpleasant when it finally gets handled in daylight. Marcus read the message once. Then he put his phone in his pocket and looked out at the city. He thought about what the next months would look like. The depositions. The media coverage, because there would be media coverage. The conversations with investors and board members and everyone in between who would need reassurance that Marcus Ellington was not the version of himself that had apparently been planned. It would be exhausting. It would be public in ways he disliked. It would require every skill he had built over 2 decades to navigate. He found that he did not mind. Because the alternative had been worse. The alternative had been signing a document he had not read carefully enough. The alternative had been continuing the gradual, quiet, carefully managed erosion of his sharpness until it was too late to understand what had happened to him. The alternative had been a future that belonged to someone else's plan. He had escaped that future because an 8-year-old girl had chosen honesty over comfort. The thought settled into him quietly, without drama. He thought about his own life at 8 years old. He had grown up with every advantage. Private. Schools. Careful guidance. Adults who shaped his world with intention. He had been taught to be strategic. To be measured. To think before he spoke. All of it had made him successful. None of it had made him brave in the way Nia was brave. That kind of courage did not come from advantages. It came from something simpler and harder to teach. It came from having been told, by someone whose opinion mattered, that the truth was worth the cost of saying it. Her grandmother. That woman had no idea, sitting somewhere tonight in a neighborhood across the city, that the lessons she had passed to her granddaughter over kitchen tables and Saturday mornings had reached further than a grandmother's lessons usually reach. I'd reached all the way into a ballroom full of strangers. I'd reached a man who needed exactly that lesson, at exactly that moment. Marcus made a note to himself. Not a mental note. He took out his phone and wrote it down, because some things were too important to trust to memory. There was a child he owed something to. Not as charity. Not as a transaction. As recognition. As a genuine reckoning with the fact that she had changed the course of his life with 4 words and the courage to say them out loud. He put the phone back in his pocket. The city below was exactly as it had been an hour ago, moving, steady, indifferent. The great machinery of a city does not stop for one man's crisis. It does not pause for revelations, or betrayals, or the quiet undoing of carefully laid plans. It continues. And so would Marcus. Not the same version of himself that had walked into that ballroom. That version had been too certain. Though comfortable with the assumption that trust, once established, did not need to be revisited. It would carry tonight differently. Not with suspicion. Not with the cold, brittle armor of someone who had been hurt and decided the safest response was to stop trusting anyone. But with attention. With the willingness to hear the voices that everyone else talked over. With the understanding that truth sometimes arrived in places where no one expected it, carried by people no one thought to listen to. Carried by a child in a blue dress with a silver bracelet and nothing to gain and no reason to stay quiet except the certainty that staying quiet was wrong. Marcus walked through the lobby toward the exit. The hotel was nearly silent now. The chandeliers had been dimmed. The roses would be removed in the morning. The marble floors reflected nothing but the overnight lights. He pushed through the door into the Atlanta night. The air was warm and carried the low, constant hum of a city that never fully sleeps. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He looked up at the building, at the floor where the ballroom was, where hours earlier he had stood at the center of a celebration that had been constructed around a plan he did not know existed. Then he looked forward. Down the street. At the city. At what came next. One evening. One morning. One voice that should have been easy to ignore. It was still here because it wasn't.